All right, boys and girls, we're going to talk about another type of model that you might see with decimal multiplication. And this is going to be one that you could really relate back to area, and area meaning, the area of something, something being covered. A lot of times in fourth grade, you talk about area, you learn about area, and you're thinking about something being covered up. Well, I mean, this is really the same thing. But when we talk about it with decimals in fifth grade, you're really thinking of an area still being covered up, but we're dealing with some pretty small numbers here, actually. And we're dealing with some decimal numbers. And so there's a model here on this page that I've already made, and I'm going to teach you how to analyze it and really kind of teach you how to come up with the numbers that are involved in this model. So this could be pretty tricky. This is kind of weird looking, especially at the beginning because you're not used to it. But as you do a few of these, I feel like personally that these aren't too bad at all. But you have to pay attention. You got to listen to your teachers, and when you practice these, there's a certain method about doing these problems, and you really have to kind of stick to it. So this is how I teach my students. I feel like this is the easiest way to learn it, and so I'm going to show you how I teach my kiddos. So I'm going to start here, and it's a lot of, it's visual. It's when you see this, you have to analyze and visualize something in your mind. And so this picture should remind you of base 10 blocks. And in your mind, you could think, okay, well, there's just some base 10 blocks that are covering an area of this page. And so what I always like to do is always like to start in a corner. And most of the time, I start in the top left corner. So I'm going to put a little star up there in the top left corner. And what I like to do is I like to really think about taking my eyes and going across the top of this model. So I'm going to draw an arrow here. That's kind of where my eyes are going to be going. And then also going down the side of this model and really looking for really what you've learned in fourth grade. I'm really looking for the length and the width of this model. And so this is how I show my kids how to do it. And again, it just takes some practice. It's kind of weird at first, but just follow along. I want to see if this makes sense to you. So from this star to this corner over here where my arrow is, here's what my eyes see. My eyes see two holes. Like when I go down this line here, and it's going to be tough for me to use on the iPad here. I'm going to try to do it as carefully as I can. When I go down this line right here that you see, this black line that I'm creating with my stylus, when I go to that point right there, I'm going to put a little dot. Basically, I just saw two holes going across the top. Okay, because the yellow, those are my holes. Those are my hundredths grids. Those are representing one hole. Well, I see two of them if I go across the top. Basically, I see one here, and then I see two right there. So I see 1, 2, and they're kind of split with a darker line right there. Okay, from there, I see 2 extra tenths. So watch me here, try to find me. So I'm going to darken in this dot here. So from here to the end of this thing, I see 2 tenths. So I'm going to label that as decimal 2. That represents 2 tenths. So across the top of this model, I see a total of 2 holes and 2 tenths. Okay, that takes care of the top. Visually, when I go and I do this next part, I go to my star, and then I go down the edge. So I'm going to go over here to my star, and I'm going to start. And again, watch for this. I'm going to go down, and as I go down, I got to carefully think about what am I seeing. Well, if I get to this point right there where my dot is, now I just saw one hole. 1. So I'm going to label it 1 there. And then if I finish it from that dot to that corner at the bottom, I see an extra 2/10. So going down the left side, I see a number of 1 and 2/10. Now, all the other stuff in the middle, I don't care about right now. I just care about going across the top and then going down the left side. So across the top, down the left side. And if I can take those two numbers and if I can put those together, my answer at the end should kind of click and make sense, because what you probably remember from 4th grade is if you're going to solve area, area equals length times width. So I actually can take my two numbers that I just got, 2 and 2/10, and I could take 1 and 2/10, and I can now go and multiply those two together to find an answer. And it should be everything here. And I want to see if we can try this, and then we're gonna try a different way and see if it clicks and makes sense to you. So let's look at this problem here. This algorithm would be 2 and 2/10 times 1 and 2/10. Basically, it's a 2 by 2. It's like 22 times 12. So let's just do the 2 by 2 here. 2 times 2 is 4. We're going to go across. 2 times 2 is 4 again. We're going to put a 0 in as our placeholder. I like to scratch numbers that I don't use. And so now I'm going to go and basically just do 22 times 1. 22 times 1 is 22. And I'm going to add this up to get my answer. Okay. At this point, I'm going to move my decimal correctly, put it in the right spot, and I'm going to get this answer of 2 and 64/100. Okay, so again, that's kind of weird, and if you didn't see it all, it's okay. It's going to take some practice, but I want to try something a little bit different here. I want to see if this will click. So I'm going to erase a few things here. I'm going to erase my length times width. I'm going to get the yellow pen, and I'm going to think about writing this problem out a little bit differently. Okay, so this time, instead of doing more of an area model and thinking about doing multiplication, I want to think about putting this all together with addition. I want to see if this clicks. So if I go back up to my model, all of it, in yellow there, I see 2 holes. So I'm going to label that as 2 holes, or 2.00. That's the same thing as the number 2. Okay. If I were doing this in class, I would ask my kids, well, how many tenths are there? How many tenths are there total? Well, there are 1, 2, 3, 4 at the bottom of this model. And then there's 5, 6 on the right side of the model. So I'm going to label this 6/10. And then I'm going to get my red color. And then I'm going to think about my units. Now, my units are kind of in a small area of this model. They're kind of in the bottom corner. And there's not too many of them. Those units actually represent hundredths. Well, how many are there? Well, if you count them, there's 4. So I'm going to label that 4 hundredths. So now, if I look at my problem and I kind of piece it all together, I could think of this, all right, if I had 2 holes plus 60 hundredths, I'm going to add a 0 in there, or excuse me, 6/10, which could be 60 hundredths, plus 4 hundredths, which I saw at the end. If I go add all that up, it looks like I get the same answer that I got as my multiplication problem. And again, all I'm doing is I'm just piecing it apart. I'm looking at it as a area problem, basically. I'm thinking, how much did it just cover? How many holes were covered there? How many tenths, covered up something? How many units covered up something? And then at the end, I'm just putting it together. So I could really see it 2 different ways. I could see it as an addition problem, or I could see it as a multiplication problem. I still think the hardest part is probably using, visually seeing what is going across the top and going down the side. But again, if you practice it, oh man, this gets super easy. Okay, we're going to do one more of these. This time I'm going to go a little bit faster. I want you guys to really think about, again, what you're seeing across the top and down the side. So I'm going to start at my star and I'm going to go across the top here. And I want to see if this clicks. Across the top, I see 3 holes and 1/10. I see 3 holes, and then I'm going to put a decimal right here and 1/10. So out to the side, I see 3 and 1/10. Down the side, if I start at that star and I go down, I apologize about my lines here, they're not really pretty. If I start at that star and I go down, I see 2 holes and then 1/10. So over here, I'm going to write 2 and 1/10. If I put it all together, and I think length times width, because it's just an area model, then I can do 3 and 1/10 times 2 and 1/10, and I can find my answer. Or essentially, it's just 31 times 21 without the decimals. So 1 times 1 gives me 1. 1 times 3 gives me 3. I have a 0 there. I'm going to scratch. 2 times 1 is 2. 3 times 2 is 6. I'm going to add this up. I'd get a 1. 3 plus 2 is 5. 6 and nothing is 6. And so now when I look at it and I move my decimals like I'm supposed to, then I'm going to get 6 and 51 hundredths as my final answer. And then I bet if you look close, you see it. There are 6 holes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There are 5 tenths. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then there's only 1 unit or hundredth. So 6 and 51 hundredths is definitely represented in this area model. And again, to me, it's just a visual. It's what you see. You got to take those eyes, and it sounds so silly, but it's true. You got to take your eyes and carefully look right across the top, and then you got to look right down the edge on the left side, and then all you're doing is just labeling what you see. So 3 and 1/10 times 2 and 1/10 gives you 6 and 51 hundredths.